The Ghost Fleet of 42. What if the most successful Nazi U-boat campaign wasn't in the frigid North Atlantic, but a mere 100 yards from the neon glow of American nightlife? It is the dark, tense winter of 1942. The United States had been thrust into the inferno of World War II just weeks prior. The shock of Pearl Harbor still echoed, but the national focus was outward, towards the far-flung fronts of the Pacific and Europe. America felt safe behind its vast oceanic shields. Its coastal cities ablaze with electric light. Its citizens largely unaware that the war had already arrived on their doorstep. A phantom menace in the dark waters of the Western Atlantic. This chapter of history, often overlooked in the grand narrative of the war, is known to historians by a cold, clinical name: Operation Drumbeat, Paukenschlag. To the U.S. Navy, it was a sudden, catastrophic reality. To the residents of Long Island, Virginia Beach, and Florida, it was a flickering series of explosions and oil slicks that stained the picturesque beaches, accompanied by the grim daily discovery of debris and sometimes bodies. Admiral Karl Donitz, the shrewd architect of the German U-boat strategy, understood America's vulnerability. He called the American East Coast the American Shooting Gallery. He knew the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard were woefully unprepared for submarine warfare so close to home. The critical ingredient he was counting on was not naval strength, but arrogance and unpreparedness. The first wave of 5 formidable Type IX U-boats, the Atlantic Wolves, departed the submarine pens of Lorient, France in late 1941. Their mission was simple: penetrate the U.S. coastal defenses, which Donitz correctly surmised were almost non-existent, and strike at the vital arteries of American industry and supply. On January 13, 1942, the massacre began. The SS Cyclops, a British tanker steaming south of Long Island, was the first victim. At 5 a.m., a torpedo from U-123, commanded by the cold and hyper-competent Lieutenant Commander Reinhard Heydegen, slammed into the ship. The tanker sank quickly. Heydegen had his first kill in American waters. It was just the opening act of a spectacular, brutal performance. The U-boats had stumbled into a paradise for hunters. The American cities, following pre-war peacetime regulations, refused to implement a coastal blackout. From the decks of the U-boats, silhouetted against the bright glow of Miami, New York, and Norfolk, the Allied merchant ships looked like carnival targets. Heydegen himself wrote in his log, "The coast is brilliantly lit. There are bright lights everywhere, as if it were peacetime. We are among the lights, and the freighters are sailing lit up. A wonderful target display." It wasn't just the lack of a blackout. The entire American infrastructure was designed to make the U-boat's job easier. Ships steamed predictably along known routes, often traveling alone, and rarely zigzagged, saving fuel for peacetime economics. The convoys that had saved Britain were considered too disruptive to U.S. domestic commerce. For months, the carnage was unimaginable. The Coast of Fire, the second happy time. From January to June 1942, Operation Drumbeat and its subsequent waves, called the Second Happy Time by U-boat crews, became an American maritime catastrophe. The numbers tell a terrifying story. Over 500 Allied ships were sunk off the North American coast during this 6-month period. The U-boats struck with impunity. They would surface at night, sometimes close enough to hear the sounds of traffic or music, and use their powerful 105mm deck guns to shell tankers and freighters, saving their precious torpedoes for larger targets. In one staggering 24-hour period, U-boats sank 10 ships, including the American tanker Coimbra, which was hit by 2 torpedoes off the New Jersey coast. The resulting explosion created a pillar of smoke and fire visible for miles. Wealthy New York vacationers on shore watched the inferno, mistaking the flashes for a distant summer lightning storm until the radio reports confirmed the unthinkable. It is here that Lizzie Shaw's secret life begins to intersect with the grand historical stage. Her husband, Thomas Shaw, was an influential merchant with a sprawling network of contacts, and more importantly, a high-ranking officer in the secretive Danite organization, a shadowy, fiercely loyal group originally formed for defense, but which had, under the extreme pressure of the approaching army, morphed into a fearsome intelligence and enforcement wing, known for its absolute ruthlessness. Through her husband's papers and the late-night hushed conversations she often overheard, women were often invisible listeners in the rigid social structure. Lizzie began to piece together a mosaic of information: military movement schedules, supply depot locations, and most chillingly, the names of local dissenters or apostates who were being secretly watched and marked for severe treatment. Lizzie's commitment to the faith was battling her deep-seated belief in justice and the sanctity of life. The tipping point came with the Mountain Meadows Massacre, a brutal, preemptive strike that occurred a year prior, but whose dark, lingering shadow was only now truly falling over the territory. Though she was far north of the atrocity, the whispers were everywhere. A wagon train of innocent immigrants passing through the territory, mostly from Arkansas and Missouri, states Brigham Young deeply mistrusted, had been ambushed and slaughtered by a combination of local Mormon militia and Paiute Indians, with the militia bearing the primary, undeniable guilt. The official narrative was that the Paiutes alone were responsible. Lizzie knew this was a lie, a terrible and corrosive stain on her people's honor. The fear of federal retaliation for this very act was now driving Young's desperate all-or-nothing resistance. Lizzie's immediate, terrifying fear was for a young man named Tobias Rort, a former printing apprentice who had been part of a small clandestine group in Salt Lake City advocating for a peaceful resolution and openly questioning the polygamous practices. Tobias had confided in Lizzie, drawn to her intelligence and her quiet dissenting spirit. He had become a marked man by the Danites. His plan, which Lizzie had only learned of in fragments, was to risk an impossible journey eastward, crossing the vast, dangerous landscape to reach the approaching federal army, not to betray his people, but to provide a crucial mitigating perspective, to inform the commanding officer, Colonel Albert Sidney Johnson, that the vast majority of the Saints did not want bloodshed, and that the Army's path of attack was exactly what Young desired. Lizzie knew that the war Young was preparing for was not merely a defense of the faith. It was an act of desperation fueled by paranoia and the cover-up of the massacre. If the Army simply followed the old established trails, they would march directly into the Echo Canyon defenses, a narrow, towering gorge that Young's men had secretly fortified into an impregnable 20-mile-long natural fortress. It would be a slaughterhouse for the federal troops and the start of a bloody, protracted guerrilla war. What was needed was a way to communicate two impossible truths to the incoming army. First, the vast majority of the Saints were not rebels and did not want war. And second, the physical key to avoiding the ambush at Echo Canyon lay in an obscure, barely known Native American trail that cut far to the north, bypassing the main fortress entirely. This is where Lizzie took her biggest, most terrifying gamble. Using her cover as a literate woman helping to catalog her husband's business ledger, she meticulously crafted a complex coded message. She wrote in a dialect of French she knew only a highly educated non-Mormon officer would recognize, weaving the necessary directional instructions into what appeared to be a mundane religious journal entry about a journey of the soul through the Valley of Shadow. The journal pages, wrapped in oilskin, were sewn into the lining of a traveling cloak she accidentally sold to a passing trader heading east. The trail was cold for weeks. Lizzie lived in a state of suspended terror, her days an agonizing wait, her nights filled with the knowledge that a single misstep would expose her as a spy and an apostate. She continued her duties, playing the role of the devoted wife, her hands busy with needlework while her mind calculated logistics of war and the probabilities of death.
"Mr. Thorne," Vesper purred, accepting a glass of champagne from an overly attentive admirer, only to dismiss him with a flick of her wrist. To what do I owe this intrusion into my, shall we say, scheduled dissipation? Elias sat down, leaning close. I need your help getting into Vanderlyn's ball tomorrow night, and I need a specific costume. Vesper's emerald eyes narrowed, losing their theatrical sparkle and gaining a dangerous focus. Vanderlyn, that viper, the man whose political machinery had my last stage production reviewed as morally corrupting filth? Exactly, Elias confirmed. He's hosting half the Etherean Society. One of their members, Arthur Penn, was murdered this morning. I think it relates to something Vanderlyn is hiding beneath his mansion, or rather, beneath the Society's headquarters. He briefly described the medallion, the colonial land deed, and the cryptic Vault of the Uncounted. Vesper listened, tapping a long manicured finger against her champagne glass. The Ethereans, she finally said, her voice dropping. They control the funding for every major cultural institution. They are everywhere, Elias. Getting into the ball is easy. Getting out with your neck intact, less so. What do you need the costume for? I need to be invisible, not just physically, but socially. I need to be a fixture they don't see. Vesper smiled, a true, calculating smile that made her look like a predator. A waiter, a footman, the hired help. They truly are invisible in this city. She agreed, not for the money Elias offered, which was negligible, but for the sweet taste of vengeance against Vanderlyn. Vesper had a vast, specialized wardrobe department at the theater, capable of outfitting a small army. By noon the next day, Elias was transformed. His journalistic stiffness was replaced by the practiced, deferential glide of a professional server, dressed in the austere black and white livery of Vanderlyn's staff. Vesper, meanwhile, would attend the ball as herself, the dazzling actress, ensuring all eyes were on her, providing the perfect luminous distraction. The Fifth Avenue facade. Vanderlyn's Fifth Avenue mansion was a monument to excessive wealth, a bastardized imitation of a French chateau. As Elias navigated the crowded, echoing halls, balancing a tray of imported liqueurs, he felt like an alien observer in a strange, dizzying kingdom. The ball was a riot of color, silk, and hypocrisy. Men in historical military masks discussed price-fixing over vintage cognac. Women in elaborate feathered headpieces exchanged subtle threats regarding their husbands' business dealings. And everywhere Elias saw the symbol of the Etherean Society, subtly woven into the floral patterns on the curtains, carved into the stone of the fireplace mantel, and sometimes worn openly as cufflinks or brooches by the most prominent attendees. Senator Vanderlyn himself, a man built like a Roman senator with a booming, theatrical laugh, stood at the top of the grand staircase, surveying his domain. He wore a mask of pure gold, obscuring everything but his cold, intelligent eyes.
But Eleanor's instincts screamed otherwise. The sequence was sophisticated, using a substitution pattern that shifted based on the total number of items listed in the manifest. It was a domestic cipher, written by an American for American eyes, and it was complex enough to warrant attention. She worked on it for 3 days, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the quiet hum of the building's ventilation. On the 4th night, the pattern yielded. The coded messages weren't about black market tires or rationed sugar. They were about vital resources and disrupting transport routes. The first message she fully decoded chilled her blood. Rattlesnake moves west in 10 days. Target, Phoenix. Ensure interruption of resource train 733. Rattlesnake, a code name. Phoenix, a city in Arizona. Train 733, a transport route.
Eleanor initially suspected arms or oil being smuggled overseas. She cross-referenced the transport schedules. Train 733 wasn't carrying oil or weapons. It was a troop train moving from a western base to a secret staging area for deployment in the Pacific. She pulled the manifest for Train 733. The manifest was heavily censored, but one detail stood out among the hundreds of standard-issue Marines: a specialized communications platoon, designated Special Unit 382. The origin point of the soldiers was a small, dusty town near the Navajo Nation. Eleanor stared at the manifest, her pulse accelerating. The spies were not targeting material. They were targeting people, a specialized unit of communicators. Could they possibly know about the new top-secret code? She felt a wave of cold dread. If the enemy knew about the code talkers, the most effective tool America had was already compromised. The war, which they were just beginning to turn, could be instantly lost. Eleanor slammed the decoding notes onto Sterling's desk. "This isn't a black market," she hissed, her voice low but fierce. "This is treason. High-level, organized treason. They are targeting a specialized communications unit. We need to alert Pacific Command immediately." Sterling, cool and condescending, barely glanced up. "Dr. Vance, the idea that some domestic spy ring knows about the new, highly classified language code is preposterous. It's likely they're just sabotaging a troop train for simple demoralization." But Eleanor knew the smell of deep-seated conspiracy. She knew the historical pattern of internal rot, of powerful men who felt their version of America was threatened by diversity and change. She knew that waiting for official channels could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe. The wind of war was howling, and it was about to collide in the vast open Pacific. Chi Bighorse, armed with the sacred words of his ancestors, was steaming toward a deadly ambush set not by the Japanese, but by a web of sophisticated, treacherous Americans. Eleanor Vance, the archivist, realized she could not wait for the bureaucracy. She had to become a warrior, fighting not with a gun, but with the cold, hard truth of a decoded message. The unbroken word was at stake, and the race had just begun. Black Tuesday and the Iron Hand. The heist was executed on the very day the stock market began its historic, terrifying slide. Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929. The original plan had been delayed by an internal Treasury Department investigation into Alastair's own motives, forcing them to move their timeline to the date of the ultimate historical event the KGC had planned for. They infiltrated the Board of Trade building. The atmosphere inside was not one of routine commerce, but of panic. Brokers were screaming into phones, paper was flying, and the first of the legendary jumps from windows were beginning. Alastair, posing as a Federal Reserve auditor, gained them access to the rarely used sub-basements. They navigated through a labyrinth of forgotten pneumatic tube systems and early electrical conduits, the very remnants of the White City's subterranean infrastructure. Silas, at the core of the ancient stone structure, began to play the lock. Using a set of specialized, non-invasive acoustic tools provided by Alastair, Silas translated the musical sequences of The Devil's Ragtime into a series of minute vibrational frequencies. His complex piano chords, a synthesis of the South's history and the North's modernity, became the key to unlocking the past. The final stone and steel door of the vault slid open with a deafening hydraulic sigh, revealing a small, dry, and meticulously preserved chamber. Inside, the light of Alastair's lantern fell on stacks of gold bars, but they were not U.S. Mint gold. They were Confederate gold bars, stamped with the rarely seen CS mark, but bearing a unique assay number matching the ledger Silas's father had documented.
The sheer quantity confirmed Alastair's worst fears. This was enough capital to purchase controlling interests in key American sectors, land, infrastructure, and even media, at fire sale prices during the Depression. The gold was the body, but the mind was a lockbox chained to the wall. Inside the box was the third and final piece of the map. It was not a drawing, but a detailed list of names and financial commitments, the full roster of the Iron Hand Society. It contained the names of U.S. senators, high-ranking Federal Reserve officials, and powerful industrialists, men who were, at that very moment, publicly denouncing the economic panic while secretly preparing to profit from it and usher in a new, segregated American order. As Alastair photographed the roster, the chilling realization hit them. The Iron Hand wasn't just a ghost of the past. It was a powerful parasite feeding on the nation's failure in the present. Suddenly, the air in the tunnel outside grew cold. The tailored suits were there, the Iron Hand's enforcers, led by a man named Judge Elms, a shadowy former U.S. attorney who was the society's legal and political strategist. Professor Finch, Elms's voice echoed in the stone corridor, perfectly calm amidst the national chaos. We knew the gold was here. We knew you were close. We also knew that the key lay in the hands of the descendants of a low-born soldier and a traitorous accountant. You may be a federal agent, but we are the true, enduring power of this republic. Hand over the ledger and the key. A standoff ensued. Bullet, remembering her great-grandfather's defiance, didn't reach for a weapon. She reached for her trumpet. She put the bell to her lips and began to play. It was not the lively jazz of the Gilded Cage, but a mournful, haunting blues, a song about the pain of history. The sound resonated through the stone chamber, a physical, powerful vibration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The sound, specifically engineered to the frequency Silas had identified, began to affect the thermoregulator valve that controlled the humidity in the vault. The vault was designed to be dry. As the humidity spiked, the centuries-old fragile Confederate currency stacked in the vault corners, the real war chest, a vast quantity of paper intended to be used for instant land purchases, began to swell and degrade rapidly. The gold was a distraction. The paper money, ready to be laundered into the New York banks, was the true initial weapon, and Bullet's music was destroying it. Enraged, Judge Elms ordered his men to fire. A violent exchange erupted. Alastair provided covering fire, and Silas, using his knowledge of the tunnels, created an explosive diversion by sabotaging the building's ancient pneumatic system. Bullet, the trumpet clutched to her chest, ran with the others, but not before she snatched a single critical piece of evidence, the full roster of the Iron Hand Society.
Thorne's eyes flickered to the S. Jones claim in her hand, then back to her face. His expression didn't change. That claim was abandoned, miss. Nothing there but rocks and pine trees. The records say the claimant moved east. Did you know him? Thorne paused, his hands, perpetually stained with soot, resting on his leather apron. We don't know much about folks who moved back east. They're gone. Nell recognized the practice stonewalling. This wasn't a hostile refusal. It was the protective reflex. She knew she had to show her hand. Mr. Thorne, I'm not interested in his land. I'm interested in the men who are looking for him. Marcus Daly has sent his fixer, a man named Sullivan, out here. They aren't looking for S. Jones the farmer. They are looking for Silas. Thorne flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in his strong frame. She had hit the mark. Silas, Nell continued, her voice low and earnest, is in danger. Daly is afraid that Silas possesses information, a map, a blueprint, that proves the Anaconda mine was not legally his to claim. If Daly finds him first, Silas would disappear. If I find him first, I can print his story and protect him with the press. Thorne looked her up and down, weighing the honesty in her eyes against the inherent corruption of her profession. Finally he spoke, his voice a low rumble. Silas didn't go east, Miss Hawthorne. He went higher. The keeper of secrets. Thorne led Nell away from Virginia City, not toward the old mining camps, but up a grueling, faint trail into the mountains, toward the isolated community of Freeman's Ridge, a place Daly's men would never think to look. Silas has been a free man in the West for nearly 30 years, Thorne explained as they climbed. He helped many of us settle here. He's a man of knowledge, a quiet scholar. The Anaconda Map, the thing Daly fears, it wasn't a mistake he found. It was geological synthesis, a lifetime of observation. He could read the earth like others read a book. The tattoo wasn't a map of a place. It was a model of a vein network. Nell finally understood the true depth of the secret. The mark was not a single line drawn on a piece of paper. It was the scientific documentation of a vast, complex ore body, carried only in Silas's memory and symbolized on his skin. It represented a true intellectual property, stolen by Daly. They reached the top of the ridge. Perched there was a small, unassuming wooden structure. A church, but its architecture suggested a dual purpose. This is the African American Masonic Lodge, Excelsior No. 1, Thorne said. It's the only law we trust. Silas is one of our most respected elders. Inside, the lodge was dim, smelling of cedar and lamp oil. Gathered around a large table were 3 elderly men and 2 women, the leadership council of Freeman's Ridge. They all looked at Nell with deep suspicion. Silas is not here, journalist, one of the elders, a woman named Sister Abigail, stated flatly. But we know Daly is looking. He sent a man, a cold one, not Daly's usual roughneck, asking strange questions about an old fiddler with a talent for carving. That would be Sullivan, Nell confirmed. He's dangerous, and he's getting closer. No, Thorne interjected, not Sullivan. The man Sister Abigail describes, he was too polite, too clean. He asked about music and history, not claims. That was Clark's man, Colonel Vance.
The ghost's messenger. The girl was fast, fueled by desperation and a raw, untamed knowledge of the subterranean layout. She wasn't an outsider, she was a creature of the tunnels. "Stop her!" Croft roared, shedding his scholarly demeanor for a moment of genuine alarm. He lunged forward, but the massive, rotating copper coils of the stabilizing matrix were directly between him and the target. Elias, seeing his chance, didn't hesitate. He feigned a move towards the girl, drawing Croft's attention, then spun and smashed the heavy bronze letter opener he'd pocketed against the glass cover of the control panel Croft had been examining. Gauges shattered, sparks flew, and the violet light of the matrix flickered violently, emitting a sound like 1,000 clocks simultaneously grinding to a halt. Croft gasped, momentarily paralyzed by the destruction of the delicate instruments. "You fool! You've destabilized the synchronization!" The distraction bought the girl the critical second she needed. She reached the large, ominous-looking machine Croft had called the Chrono Disruptor. It was darker than the Matrix, built of iron and black wood, and it was beginning to hum a deep, resonant tone, a sound that vibrated not just in the air, but in Elias's bones. "The ghost is with me," the girl cried, swinging the wrench like a weapon. Instead of hitting the controls, she struck a specific exposed magnetic coil on the side of the disruptor. The Chrono Disruptor screamed. The violet light in the chamber vanished, replaced by an intense, strobing orange energy emanating solely from the shattered coil. The hum increased to a deafening roar. Elias felt a sharp, sickening lurch, not of the floor, but of his perception. For a fraction of a second, the ancient stone walls around them seemed to shimmer. The brass machinery looked like dust, and he could swear he saw the ghost of the colonial-era storehouse superimposed over the Finch laboratory.
Croft recovered, his face contorted with rage. He tackled Elias, slamming him against a stack of forgotten inventors' journals. "What have you done? That machine is unstable." "Ask her," Elias yelled, struggling under Croft's surprisingly strong grip. He pointed towards the girl, who was now scrambling up the structure of the chrono disruptor, ignoring the high-voltage sparks arcing around her. "She is a scavenger, a tunnel rat," Croft spat. "She and her kind live in the abandoned sections of the colonial foundations. They found Finch's notes. She doesn't know what she's doing." The girl reached the top of the disruptor. She pulled a small brass lever that seemed entirely out of place on the massive machine. The orange arcing stopped abruptly. The air went silent, heavy, and cold. "I know exactly what I'm doing," the girl said, her breath ragged. "I'm calling him." The uncounted invention. Before Croft could react, the center of the chrono disruptor, a circular iron grate, began to glow. The temperature in the room plummeted. Then, slowly, almost impossibly, a figure began to materialize within the glowing circle. It was a man, dressed in the antiquated but fine wool coat of a gentleman from the 1830s. He looked confused, disoriented, and utterly real. His face was thin, his eyes haunted by a long-ago fire. "Professor Alastair Finch," Elias breathed, recognizing the face from the obscure historical sketch he'd found.
The rhythm of the conspiracy. The $1,000 felt like a burning weight in Bullet's satchel, a small fortune that smelled faintly of smuggled rum and old cotton. It was payment for a history she had tried desperately to forget, a history woven into the brass of her great-grandfather's trumpet, the Colonel. Alastair Finch, the meticulous professor, led Bullet and Silas through a maze of back alleys to a discreet brownstone near the loop. The building itself seemed to predate the Great Fire, squat and unremarkable, nestled between soaring new commercial high-rises, a metaphor for the secret history Alastair chased. "My office, as I call it," Alastair said, gesturing to a sparsely furnished apartment on the 3rd floor. It was dominated by a heavy, custom-built table overlaid with photographic equipment that looked less like a darkroom setup and more like a scientific laboratory. No windows facing the street, Alastair noted, pulling down thick velvet curtains over the few that existed. Maximum discretion. This equipment, he tapped the camera apparatus, is designed to capture minute details without damaging the paper. We'll use polarized light to distinguish the iron gall ink from the parchment fibers. Bullet carefully opened the trumpet case. The kernel lay gloaming, its lacquer worn smooth from decades of music and travel. It wasn't just an instrument, it was a lineage. She gently removed the tuning slide, retrieved the small, tightly rolled parchment from its secret spot, and laid it on the heavy table. The paper, yellowed and brittle, bore the faint but distinct marks of the Confederate War Department seal. Alastair worked with the silent, surgical precision of a man obsessed. He layered filters and adjusted the lights. "Observe, Miss Jones," he instructed, peering through a loop. The original lines, the architectural sketch of the subterranean structure, are drawn in standard iron gall ink dating to the 1860s. But these symbols, he pointed to a series of interlocking geometric shapes, these are added in a different medium, possibly a later invisible ink, only visible under specialized light. The polarized light revealed the cipher clearly. The Knights of the Golden Circle's triple loop emblem, a marker used to identify the location to only high-ranking members. "Your great-grandfather, Elias Jones," Alastair explained, recording the details meticulously in a small leather-bound notebook, was clearly aware of the paper's significance. By wrapping it around the valve casing, he preserved it from moisture and fire, but also ensured it was always close. It was a soldier's secret,
a piece of enemy intelligence hidden in plain sight. Meanwhile, Silas sat quietly in the corner, his long fingers drumming a silent rhythm on his knee. He was absorbed, not by the map, but by the implications. "Professor," Silas finally spoke, his voice quiet but intense. "My father's ledger. It was a detailed breakdown of the funding. The KGC didn't just hide gold. They created shell companies, textile mills, shipping firms across the North in the 1870s and 80s. They laundered the gold into assets, creating a diversified portfolio. The gold vault was their strategic fallback, the core liquid capital waiting for the precise moment of national economic instability. A financial siege rather than a military one," Alistair concluded, nodding slowly. "They were playing a long game. They knew that if the United States government became too centralized, too progressive, the states' rights movement, their ultimate goal, would be crushed. They aimed to buy political influence during a panic. The photographic analysis finished, yielding a high-resolution plate of Bullett's map section. Alistair then produced his own piece of the triptych, a section recovered from a safe deposit box tied to a deceased banker in Boston. When the two images were digitally aligned, the vault's location was confirmed with chilling clarity. Deep beneath the Chicago Board of Trade building, built upon the former exposition grounds. The enduring shadow and modern echoes. By the late 1870s, the Big Bonanza, the consolidated heart of the Comstock lode, had begun to show signs of exhaustion. The great pumps continued to battle the scalding subterranean water, but the silver veins were thinning and the ore quality was diminishing. The era of colossal, easy profits was drawing to a close. The collapse of Virginia City. The town that silver had built, Virginia City, was an immediate casualty of the downturn. Its population, which had peaked at over 25,000, began to hemorrhage. The intricate network of specialized businesses, theaters, and grand mansions that had sprung up in the remote desert, funded by the continuous bullion stream, withered almost overnight. The final symbolic blow came in 1875 with the Great Fire of Virginia City. Igniting in a boarding house, the fire swept through the wooden, densely packed town, destroying nearly all the surface infrastructure, including the massive hoisting works and the administrative buildings of the mining companies. It was a physical cleansing, an ironic echo of the subterranean fires that had plagued the mines for years. The town was partially rebuilt, but the fire accelerated the exodus of capital and people. Aspinwall and Garrison's successors in the Union Mining Trust, having successfully extracted the bulk of the wealth and transferred it east, saw little reason to invest heavily in a failing venture. They sold off assets, closed the deeper, most dangerous shafts, and retreated to their opulent estates in New York and San Francisco, leaving behind a skeletal crew and a landscape of abandoned machinery. The true legacy, the gold standard battle. The immense financial power created by the Comstock lode did not vanish. It simply transformed into political influence. The hundreds of millions of dollars of silver mined during and immediately after the Civil War created a fundamental tension in American monetary policy that dominated politics for the next 50 years. The Battle of the Standards. The creditor stance, East Coast. The powerful financiers, the heirs of Aspinwall and Garrison, now wanted the U.S. to adhere strictly to the gold standard. Their wealth, the profits they had extracted, was in gold or gold-backed securities. They favored hard money, which meant limited currency supply and low inflation, protecting their massive established fortunes. The debtor stance, West and South. Farmers, small miners, and debtors in the agricultural regions demanded the free coinage of silver. They argued that putting silver back into the money supply would increase the currency volume, cause inflation, and allow them to pay off their massive debts more easily. This battle culminated in the dramatic political movement led by William Jennings Bryan, whose famous 1896 Cross of Gold speech directly challenged the Eastern financiers, arguing, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." The irony is profound. The very people who became fabulously rich by mining the Comstock silver were the ones who later fought hardest to demonetize silver, locking the nation onto the gold standard to protect their accumulated wealth. The fight over currency was the final devastating echo of the Comstock's industrial might, a shadow war fought not with bullets but with banking legislation. The modern echo, the poison, and the myth. Today, the truth of the Comstock lode remains obscured by the myth. The ghost of contamination. While the old Virginia city remains a dusty, fascinating tourist attraction, the environmental legacy is still real. Scientists continue to monitor the Carson River Superfund site, grappling with the extensive mercury and arsenic contamination that is a direct toxic inheritance from Aspinwall's wartime industrial methods. The poisonous ghost of the lode is still leaching into the Nevada ecosystem. The Forgotten Fund. Historical research increasingly confirms that the Comstock lode was the single most crucial source of hard currency for the Union during the Civil War. It did not just supplement the Union treasury, it prevented financial collapse at key junctures, enabling Lincoln's administration to fight a sustained long-term conflict. The Comstock silver was the strategic financial weapon that Garrison and Aspinwall had silently forged. The historical reality of the Comstock lode is one of astonishing technological innovation: Datesheimer's timbering, the massive steam pumps; brutal corporate efficiency, Aspinwall's monopoly on mercury and transport; immense national service, funding the Union; and profound social cost, the exploitation of labor and environmental devastation. It is a true American story of a fortune so vast and a corporate conspiracy so successful that its actual world-changing impact had to be intentionally buried beneath a romantic, simpler myth of the Wild West. The real treasure was not the silver itself, but the power it generated. A power that silently dictated the course of the Civil War, funded the railroads, and laid the financial foundation for the modern industrial United States.
The financier's fate and the moral vacuum. The architects of the Comstock Empire, William H. Aspinwall, the financier, and Cornelius Garrison, the political operative, did not merely walk away from the West. They strategically converted their industrial plunder into the ultimate prize, untouchable social and financial permanence on the East Coast. Aspinwall, the discreet withdrawal. William Aspinwall, the man whose vision brought German engineering and New York capital to the Nevada desert, was a study in quiet, calculated withdrawal. He was never the flamboyant public figure. Financial legacy. By the late 1860s, Aspinwall had deftly sold off most of his direct mining interests in the Comstock, realizing that the peak production was unsustainable. He reinvested the massive profits into his core business, the Pacific Mail Steamship Company and, crucially, Manhattan Real Estate and Utilities. He became one of the key shareholders and builders of New York's infrastructure, transforming himself from a Western mining baron to a respected Eastern philanthropist and urban planner. Historical footnote: Aspinwall ensured his name was associated with progress, not plunder. He was known for his vast art collection and his contributions to the arts. In the history books, he is remembered primarily as a shipping magnate and a railroad director. His crucial, war-defining role as the secret funder of the Union via the Comstock lode was successfully rendered invisible. His legacy was one of quiet dignity, a deliberate contrast to the raucous nature of the wealth he amassed. Garrison, the politician's power play. Cornelius Garrison, the Commodore, took a far louder and more confrontational path. Garrison was a master of political manipulation, and he used his share of the silver fortune to secure high political office and maintain aggressive control over infrastructure. Political ascent.
Garrison used his Comstock wealth and the powerful banking connections it provided to catapult himself into New York City politics. His fortune allowed him to enter the cutthroat world of finance and manipulation that characterized the Gilded Age. The Railroad Wars. Unlike Aspinwall, Garrison remained heavily involved in the volatile world of railroads, entering into legendary, brutal corporate battles with rivals like Jay Gould and Cornelius Vanderbilt. These railroad wars were essentially a proxy battle fought with Comstock silver. The wealth generated from the dusty Nevada mines directly fueled the aggressive consolidation and monopolization of American transportation networks, shaping the entire structure of the nation's economy. A scandalous legacy. Garrison's name was synonymous with ruthless business practices, stock manipulation, and political corruption. He embraced the role of the unapologetic robber baron. However, even with his high profile, the origin of his enabling wealth, the systematic exploitation and transfer of Nevada silver during the Civil War, remained a secondary detail to his grander, more immediate power struggles in New York. The true moral vacuum. The final bitter irony of the Comstock story lies not in the corruption, but in the moral and geographic vacuum left behind. The Comstock lode was an incubator for technological progress, square-set timbering, industrial-scale pumps, early air cooling, and an engine of national survival, union funding. Yet, the narrative that endured was one of fleeting individual luck. The real moral failure of the era was not that the industrialists were greedy, that was expected, but that they were permitted to externalize every cost. Cost to the land. The mercury pollution, the 7,500 tons, was never mitigated by the corporations that caused it. It became a long-term tax on the American public when the area was later designated a Superfund site. Cost to the worker. The thousands of miners, many of whom were marginalized Chinese immigrants and poor Europeans, who endured heat stroke, silicosis, and fatal accidents, were left with no pensions, no health care, and no social safety net. Their sacrifice was dismissed as the inevitable risk of the frontier. Cost to history. The calculated erasure of the silver's role allowed the nation to romanticize its founding economic moment, avoiding the painful truth that the successful reunification of the United States was in large part purchased with corporate-controlled silver extracted under conditions of extreme exploitation. The mountain of silver was successfully liquidated and its story rewritten, leaving behind a poisoned river, ghost towns, and an enduring myth of individual ruggedness that belies the brutal, organized, and world-changing power of America's first great industrial conspiracy. The Reckoning at the Copper Palace. Nell Hawthorne returned to Butte under the heavy gaze of the Anaconda smokestacks, which seemed to loom larger, more malevolent, now that she held the key to their foundation. The journal of Silas O'Connell, nestled securely in her satchel, felt like a literal weapon, capable of shattering the financial architecture of the Gilded Age. She knew a simple expose in the Butte Gazette would not be enough. Daly would bribe, slander, or outright buy her silence before the story reached the national wires. A political weapon, Clark's preferred strategy, was too easily dismissed as partisan mudslinging. The only way to stop a Copper King was with the one thing he truly respected: law and property rights. Nell met with Judge Jeremiah Finch, a man of impeccable, if old-fashioned, legal integrity. One of the few men in the territory who had not yet been bought or bullied by the mining magnates. She presented him with a summary of Silas's testimony, the original 1874 S. Jones preemption filing, and the original Anaconda patent of 1881. Judge, Nell stated, spreading the documents across his desk. Daly's patent claims the entire load, but Silas O'Connell's prior claim under S. Jones overlaps with the Anaconda's initial boundary line. The law of prior appropriation gives Silas the superior claim to that small, desolate plot. If we can prove Daly used Silas's stolen geological knowledge to correctly stake the rest of the Anaconda claim, the trunk he saw in 1858, it poisons the entire title. Judge Finch put on his spectacles, peering at the original preemption document. A preemption claim, even if abandoned, can be resurrected if the claimant returns or if fraud is proven in the subsequent patent. But Miss Hawthorne, proving he stole the knowledge from a slave's back, that is circumstantial, impossible testimony. Mo, Nell corrected, holding up the journal. It's not circumstantial, it is the motive, and the motive is what I'm taking to Daly right now. I need an injunction prepared. I will not print the story until I have filed this motion challenging the boundary, locking up the title in the courts. This gives Silas time to reach safety. The Copper King's fury. The Anaconda headquarters was a granite fortress, staffed by nervous clerks and heavy-set guards. Nell bypassed the anteroom and marched directly into Marcus Daly's inner office, catching him in a meeting with his chief counsel. Daly, sensing the gravity in her demeanor, dismissed his staff. He leaned back in his leather chair, a portrait of condescending confidence. "Miss Hawthorne," he drawled, lighting a Cuban cigar. "I assume this is about the usual complaints. Child labor, dust, pollution, how I'm ruining your pretty town." Nell didn't sit. She walked to his desk and placed two items before him: the faded Kentucky newspaper clipping describing the runaway slave and the leather-bound journal of Silas O'Connell. "This is about the Red Heart, Mr. Daly," Nell said, her voice shaking slightly but stealing her resolve. "This is about how a runaway slave named Silas O'Connell helped a failing Kentucky geologist map the greatest copper vein in the world. This is about the night in 1858 when you violated a sleeping man to memorize the map tattooed on his back. And this is the autobiography where Silas records every detail of that theft." Daly's face went instantly pale, the blood draining from his features until only the fierce cold blue of his eyes remained. The cigar dropped from his lips unnoticed. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by the primal terror of a man who sees his foundation turn to quicksand. "That is a lie," Daly spat, his voice dangerously low. "A filthy abolitionist fabrication. You dare bring that antebellum rubbish into my office?" "It's not rubbish, Mr. Daly. It's the original title. And I have filed an intent to seek an injunction on behalf of S. Jones, a name I believe you will recognize from the 1874 claims, challenging the boundary of your Anaconda patent. Your entire operation, the jobs, the stock, the fortunes of every man in this town will be frozen in court until you can prove the source of your original surveying data was not based on stolen knowledge." "They have to," Elias countered. "How do you explain a ghost from 1835 and a temporal anchor? The truth is too absurd, Vesper, but the effects, the symptoms, will be impossible to hide." Over the next few days, Elias, with Eliza, now posing as his quiet, soot-stained research assistant, hiding in his small apartment, chronicled the city's slow, agonizing collapse of efficiency. The trains. Commuter rail lines experienced inexplicable delays. The synchronized clockwork of the switches, signals, and schedules, all subtly influenced by the matrix's steadying energy, was gone. Trains arrived minutes, sometimes seconds off schedule, resulting in near disasters and mass confusion. The stock market. Trading on Wall Street became volatile. The instantaneous transfer of information via telegraph and the synchronized high-speed calculations of the banking machines faltered, leading to cascading errors and massive losses for the uncounted, the small investors. The Ethereum members, thanks to their advanced warning, were able to pull their assets out, insulating themselves from the crash. Manufacturing. The immense steel mills and production lines that relied on perfectly timed automation ground to a crawl. The electrical current that powered the city was suffering random spikes and drops. The Gilded Age's industrial engine was stuttering. The city's elite, still unaware of the supernatural root of the problem, called it the Great Malaise. The Etherean Society, now led by Vanderland's remaining partners, used the crisis to consolidate power further. They blamed the chaos on anarchists, corrupt public officials, and foreign influence. The new ghost. Eliza, meanwhile, was obsessed with two things: the recovery of Finch's complete notes and the location of the chronodisruptor. The disruptor didn't explode, Eliza concluded after reading Elias's description of the final moments. It was designed to survive, to be the final repository of Finch's science. And if the matrix is broken, the disruptor, even deactivated, is still broadcasting a low-level reverse etheric wave. Elias realized what she was getting at. Finch hadn't just destroyed the city's present synchronization, he had left a permanent, powerful echo in the city's etheric fabric. They finally located the original site of Finch's first laboratory, a forgotten brownstone on the Upper East Side that had been secretly owned by the Etherean Society for decades. They broke in using Eliza's inherited knowledge of tunnel passages and rudimentary lockpicking skills. The brownstone's basement was empty, save for a heavy-duty, recently installed steel door. Elias noted the faint, familiar violet glow seeping from beneath the crack. They moved the disruptor here, Elias realized. They want to contain it, perhaps even reactivate it, far from the public eye. Eliza found a small, rusted iron box hidden in the rubble. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilskin, were several pages of Professor Finch's final notes. The ink was faded, but the calculations were chillingly clear. Finch had known the matrix would be found and misused. His last, terrible calculation was a contingency. The notes revealed that the chronodisruptor, now broadcasting its low-level reverse etheric wave, was subtly and intermittently interacting with the destabilized environment of the city. It wasn't erasing the past, but making it visible, a low-level residual holographic phenomenon. It is leaving his memory on the city, Eliza translated, her eyes wide with wonder. Finch hasn't vanished. His temporal self is now imprinted on the city's fabric. He is creating the ghost of Manhattan. The effect was subtle at first, a glint of an 1830s lamppost appearing for a second on a modern sidewalk, the faint, high-pitched scream of a fire long past, the brief, spectral image of a colonial-era merchant on a busy street corner. Only those sensitive to the aether or those with highly unstable minds could perceive the echoes. Eliza and Elias had not ended the Etherean Society's control, but they had given the city a weapon, the ability to see beyond the Gilded Age facade, the ability to see the city's raw, uncounted past now haunting its highly structured present. Elias looked at the notes, then at Eliza, and finally at the steel door sealing the disruptor. He knew his fight was far from over. The real story, the one that would truly shatter the illusion of progress, was just beginning.
The Invisible War. Elias now had the impossible task of proving a temporal phenomenon to a city obsessed with measurable material wealth. He held Professor Finch's cryptic final notes, the testimony of a tunnel rat named Eliza, and the knowledge of two destroyed time machines. His greatest weapon, however, was his newspaper, the New York Tribune, and his journalistic credibility. The Etherean Society, meanwhile, launched a campaign of sophisticated disinformation. They needed to explain the ongoing malaise, the city's industrial inefficiency, without revealing the truth. Senator Vanderland, having survived the cistern collapse by retreating from the flooded chamber just in time, emerged as the central public figure. He hosted a press conference blaming the city's problems on a coordinated act of economic sabotage carried out by foreign agitators and anarchists attempting to undermine American prosperity. Elias tried to publish his findings. He wrote a detailed article outlining the Etherian Society's control, the subterranean vault, and the destruction of the temporal anchor. His editor, a cautious and pragmatic man named Mr. Harrington, pulled the article. "Elias, I believe you saw something terrifying down there," Harrington said, rubbing his temples. "But I cannot print a story claiming the wealthiest men in America are running a time travel conspiracy. We need evidence, real evidence, not the ramblings of a professor who supposedly died in 1835. Harrington pointed to a telegram he had just received. "Vanderland has pulled all his advertising from the Tribune. He's leveraged half the city's industry to do the same. If we print this, we lose the paper." This was the Etherian Society's true power: financial suffocation. They didn't need to kill Elias, they just needed to sever his voice. Elias was forced to pursue the story in fragments, burying small, coded references to the uncounted past and temporal discrepancies in articles about industrial delays and market volatility. He was fighting an invisible war against an enemy that controlled not just the city's finances, but its narrative. The flicker of the past. Eliza, now living clandestinely in Eliza's flat, became his eyes and ears on the fringe. She understood the temporal echoes better than he did. "The disruptor is like a broken mirror," Eliza explained. "It doesn't reflect the whole past, only tiny, powerful fragments of moments imprinted with strong etheric energy, moments of great fear, great change, or great power." The city's population was starting to notice things. Small, inexplicable occurrences. A society woman reported seeing her elegant, modern silver teapot momentarily replaced by a crude colonial pewter mug. A stockbroker swore he heard the voice of an auctioneer from the 1850s calling out prices that didn't exist. The most unsettling reports came from the lower Manhattan docks. The persistent, bone-chilling scent of smoke and burnt wood, lingering for hours in areas untouched by fire. These events were all easily dismissed as fatigue, hallucination, or the stress of the malaise. But Eliza and Eliza knew they were the subtle, persistent presence of the ghost of Manhattan. Elias needed to capture one of these echoes, a single, irrefutable piece of evidence. He decided to focus on the area around the original site of Finch's lab and the current location of the contained chronodisruptor, the Upper East Side brownstone. He secured the assistance of an eccentric, disgraced former photographer named Jabez Finch, a distant relative of Professor Finch who had been ridiculed for his early failed attempts to photograph invisible light spectrums. Elias, desperate, promised him the greatest photograph in history. Jabez agreed, setting up his massive flash powder camera apparatus near the brownstone. They focused on an alleyway known for intense, sudden bursts of the burnt wood smell. For 3 nights, they waited. Elias stood watch, while Eliza, positioned in the tunnels, monitored the subtle atmospheric shifts that preceded an etheric echo. On the 4th night, Eliza signaled with 3 quick taps on a drain pipe. "It's coming," she whispered, as Elias positioned himself behind the camera. A big one, a moment of great fear. Suddenly, the scent of burning wood and sulfur choked the alley. The air grew perceptibly colder. Then, spanning the entire width of the alley, a flickering, semi-transparent image began to coalesce. A spectral vision of a colonial woman, her face contorted in terror, clutching a small box as she frantically ran, pursued by 2 British redcoats. This was not a ghost. It was a temporal imprint, a moment of profound stress and fear from the city's past, played out on its present stage. The redcoats seemed to be reaching for the woman, their muskets appearing like distortions in the modern lamplight. Elias fired the flash powder. A blinding, deafening boom erupted, illuminating the alleyway for a critical second. The flash powder, with its high thermal signature, was the only light source powerful enough to register the high-frequency etheric energy on the photographic plate. The spectral scene vanished. The air returned to normal. Jabez, trembling, checked the plate. I think I got it, Mr. Thorne. I photographed a ghost, or
a memory, or something else entirely. The counterattack. Elias finally had his proof. He rushed back to the Tribune, bypassing Harrington, and headed straight for the press room. He intended to seize the typesetting room and print a single, devastating edition of the paper, featuring the spectral photograph and the full, unvarnished truth of the Aetherian Society. But the Aetherians were faster. As he sprinted through the busy newsroom, two plainclothes detectives intercepted him. They presented a warrant signed by a city judge known to be indebted to Vanderland. Elias Thorne, you are under arrest for inciting panic, conspiracy to commit arson, referencing the boiler explosion, and associating with known anarchists, the lead detective stated, pinning Elias's arms behind his back. Elias struggled, shouting, "This is a cover-up. The city is collapsing because of Vanderland's greed. The evidence is on this plate." He held up the precious, undeveloped photographic plate. The second detective calmly snatched the plate from his hand and smashed it against the corner of a desk. "Evidence destroyed," he stated flatly. Elias was dragged out of the Tribune building, his shouts of "the ghost of Manhattan" drowned out by the noise of the printing presses. He had been silenced and neutralized. He was taken to the infamous Blackwell's Island prison. As the ferry carried him across the churning East River, Elias looked back at the glittering skyline of Manhattan, the proud, impossible city built on secrets and stolen time. He had failed to expose the truth through the press, but he had planted a seed of doubt. Now, only Eliza and the ghost remained free to fight the Aetherian Society. Elias, imprisoned, had to find a way to reach Vesper and get her to use her unique position in high society to fight the invisible war on the Aetherian Society's home turf, the Gilded Cage itself.
Blackwell's Island and the Uncounted Ally. Blackwell's Island, a place of profound despair and isolation, sat like a cold stone in the East River. Elias, stripped of his fine clothes and his journalistic identity, was now inmate 472. The prison was meant to break spirits, but it only sharpened Elias's resolve. He needed to get a message to Vesper. His opportunity came through an unlikely ally, Gideon Vance, a former typesetter from the Tribune who had been imprisoned years ago on a trumped-up charge orchestrated by Vanderland himself. Vance was a silent man with deft hands and an unwavering grudge against the Aetherian elite. Elias confided in Vance, detailing the full absurd truth of the Matrix, the Ghost, and the Aetherian Society's temporal control. Vance, having witnessed the Society's relentless financial manipulation firsthand, believed him instantly. "The Society fears two things," Vance whispered during a grueling work detail in the laundry, "the truth being printed and the uncounted rising up. They built this city on the backs of the invisible workers, the ones they never bother to list." Vance agreed to smuggle a coded message out. Elias wrote a brief note on a scrap of cloth using diluted bleach, detailing the fate of the photographic plate and the location of Eliza, Elias's flat. Most crucially, he asked Vesper to perform a highly specific, dangerous task: infiltrate the Aetherian Society's annual Winter Solstice Gala. This gala was the most secretive event in New York's calendar, a night where the Society members, relieved of public scrutiny, truly discussed their operations. It was scheduled for only 3 days away, to be held at a secret location known only as the Cryptos. Vesper's Gambit, the Cryptos. Vance's contact, a sympathetic ferryman, delivered the coded cloth to Vesper. She, already suspicious after Elias's abrupt disappearance and the Tribune's silence, was galvanized. Vesper realized that she couldn't rely on the press or the law. The war had to be fought on the Society's own ground, the social battlefield. She understood the power of performance, distraction, and the corrosive nature of gossip better than anyone. Her first task was to locate the Cryptos. This was not a physical location, but a code word for the Society's most private meeting place. Leveraging her high society connections, Vesper spent a frantic day extracting information. She finally learned that the Cryptos was the Society's private vault beneath the New York Public Library, constructed with Society funds and accessible only through a hidden entrance in the main reading room's floor. Vesper knew she needed a partner. She found Eliza at Eliza's flat. The young tunnel rat, initially distrustful of the glamorous actress, was quickly won over by Vesper's genuine concern for Elias and her fierce practical intelligence. The gala will be a gathering of every key Etherean member, Vesper planned, pacing her dressing room. My role is to be the perfect distraction. Yours, Eliza, is to use your knowledge of the Undercity to find an unseen way in. Eliza pointed to a massive, detailed map of the city's water and steam pipes she had spread across the floor. The library is built over an old municipal cistern system that connects to the subway construction tunnels. If I can get into the main steam conduits beneath Fifth Avenue, I can reach the library's sub-basement. I might even be able to get close to the Chrono Disruptor's current location, the Solstice Gala. The night of the gala, the library glowed with an unusual subdued light. Vesper arrived in a stunning, custom-made gown, her entrance a masterpiece of calculated drama. Her performance began immediately. She didn't seek out Vanderland. Instead, she focused on his most nervous and talkative subordinates, subtly planting seeds of catastrophic financial panic. "The Society fears two things," Vance whispered during a grueling work detail in the laundry. "The truth being printed and the uncounted rising up. They built this city on the backs of the invisible workers, the ones they never bother to list." Vance agreed to smuggle a coded message out. Elias wrote a brief note on a scrap of cloth using diluted bleach, detailing the fate of the photographic plate and the location of Elias's flat. Most crucially, he asked Vesper to perform a highly specific, dangerous task: infiltrate the Etherean Society's annual Winter Solstice Gala. This gala was the most secretive event in New York's calendar, a night where the Society members, relieved of public scrutiny, truly discussed their operations. It was scheduled for only 3 days away, to be held at a secret location known only as the Cryptos.
"I hear the synchronization in the new banking machines is collapsing," she would say airily, accepting a drink. "They say it's affecting memory. Clients are forgetting their account balances. Utterly tragic." Her rumors, echoing the true effects of the broken matrix, caused visible unease. The Ethereans feared the social fallout more than anything. Meanwhile, in the darkness beneath the city, Eliza, equipped with a coil of rope and a dark lantern, navigated the cramped, hissing steam tunnels. She was looking for a specific, often ignored, colonial-era drain pipe that her grandfather's notes claimed led directly to the library's sub-basement. She found it, a rusted, narrow pipe labeled 1842 Overflow. It was a tight squeeze, but she was small and determined. She wriggled through, dropping silently into the library's massive, echoing sub-basement. She wasn't alone. In the center of the dusty, cathedral-like room, surrounded by newly installed steel walls and buzzing generators, stood the Chrono Disruptor. The Ethereans had moved it here, attempting to contain its reverse etheric broadcast. Eliza approached cautiously. The disruptor wasn't active, but the sheer force of its silent, suppressed power radiated heat. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence. "The ghost's little messenger. I was expecting you." Senator Vanderlyn stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't in formal wear, but a dark, practical suit. His face was drawn with exhaustion, his golden mask gone. He looked less like a Roman senator and more like a desperate, cornered merchant. "Your professor and his technology have nearly bankrupted the Society, girl," Vanderlyn growled. "But we are not defeated. We have the disruptor, and we have a new plan. A reset. The final gambit. Vanderlinde explained their desperate, terrifying contingency. The great malaise was proving too destructive to control. Instead of fixing the matrix, the Etherian society planned to use the disruptor to perform a controlled, targeted temporal shift. We are going to erase the last 10 years of industrial progress, Vanderlinde explained with manic fervor. We will roll the timeline back to a point just before the matrix became operational. We lose some wealth, but we eliminate the unstable technology, and, crucially, we eliminate every law, every policy, and every competitor that threatens the Etherian society. We will have a clean slate and the absolute monopoly on the city's future. Vanderlinde pulled a single archaic key from his pocket, an ornate, almost ceremonial artifact made of polished black stone. This is the key that Professor Finch's assistant made. It is the only thing that can activate the disruptor's reset function. Eliza looked at the disruptor, then back at Vanderlinde's sweating, desperate face. She knew that if Vanderlinde initiated the reset, her life, her family's history, and every moment Elias had lived as a reporter would be erased. The ghost of Manhattan would be silenced forever. As Vanderlinde moved toward the disruptor, holding the key aloft, the main library reading room directly above them erupted in chaos. Vesper's campaign had worked. The Etherians were panicking, believing their fortunes were collapsing. The distraction was perfect. Eliza seized her moment. She didn't attack Vanderlinde. Instead, she bolted toward the central pillar supporting the main floor above, a pillar that was connected to a cluster of the library's massive, historical heating conduits. Using her inherited knowledge, she quickly located a bypass valve and cranked it open hard. A deafening hiss filled the sub-basement as superheated steam, the same steam that warmed the gala above, jet blasted out, shrouding the entire chamber in a thick, blinding cloud.
Confrontation in the steam. The sub-basement became a blinding, chaotic void. Superheated steam hissed violently from the open valve, turning the air into a scalding, opaque white cloud. The frantic shouts of the Etherians and the muffled music of the Solstice Gala from above added to the surreal terror. Vanderlinde, blinded and panicked, stumbled, dropping the black stone reset key. Eliza, who knew the dimensions of the room and was accustomed to the cramped, dark conditions of the tunnels, used the sensory deprivation to her advantage. She dropped to the wet concrete floor, moving on hands and knees, ignoring the searing heat, searching for the key. "Eliza!" Vanderlinde bellowed, his voice distorted by the steam. "I know you're here. You cannot stop the inevitable. We are saving the city from Professor Finch's folly." Eliza's fingers brushed against something smooth and cold, the key. She snatched it, clutching the heavy stone in her hand. At that moment, a heavy crash echoed from the far end of the sub-basement. A section of the ceiling, weakened by the structural shifts from the Matrix's destruction and the library's age, gave way. A ragged figure, covered in filth and steam, dropped from the pipe network and landed on the stone floor. It was Elias. He had bribed Gideon Vance with the last of his money, used Vance's smuggled tools to escape Blackwell's Island, and navigated the city's complex sewer and steam conduit network with the vague instructions Eliza had left behind. His journalistic mission now was personal survival. He saw the chrono disruptor silhouetted in the center of the room, and the desperate Senator Vanderlinde lunging toward a small, crouching figure, Eliza. "Vanderlinde!" Elias yelled, charging through the steam. The senator, momentarily distracted, spun around. "Thorn! Impossible! You should be rotting on the island!"
Elias didn't use his fists, he used his training. He slammed his shoulder into Vanderlyn's chest, driving the heavier man back against the humming steel casing of the chrono disruptor. Vanderlyn cried out as the unstable machine's energy field momentarily surged. Eliza crawled to Elias, holding out the key. He was going to reset, erase everything. Elias looked at the key, the power to erase a decade of history in his hand. He looked at the disruptor, its large circular activation panel exposed. He knew they couldn't simply destroy the key or the machine. The Etherians would just find another way. They had to use Finch's own science against the society. The ghosts broadcast. He remembered the words from Finch's final notes that Eliza had translated. The disruptor, when subjected to an opposing etheric frequency, will not erase, it will broadcast. Eliza, Elias said, shouting to be heard over the steam. You have to know Finch's frequency, the one that activated the anchor. Eliza shook her head, terrified. I don't know the exact calculation, but my grandfather's notes mention that Finch often used a low-frequency steam conduit resonance to initiate etheric tests. The main heating pipe, the one I just ruptured. Elias scrambled up the disruptor's control console. He located the manual frequency input dial, a large brass wheel left exposed by Finch's original design. I need you to open the steam full blast. Give me the maximum resonance. As Eliza lunged back toward the valve, Vanderlyn, recovering quickly, tackled Elias, grappling for the key. You can't publish this, Thorne. You can't break the city's structure, Vanderlyn shrieked. The structure is built on a lie, Elias roared, kicking out and sending Vanderlyn stumbling backward just as the senator's hand clipped the valve lever. The steam instantly doubled in pressure and volume. The entire sub-basement began to vibrate with the low, grinding resonance of the stressed heating conduits. Elias, seizing the moment of maximum vibration, thrust the Blackstone key into the activation slot and simultaneously spun the brass frequency dial, aligning the pointer with the point of maximum mechanical resonance. The chrono disruptor did not reset. Instead, it lit up like a vengeful star. The machine, now absorbing the steam resonance and the unstable etheric energy of the broken matrix, emitted a blinding, brilliant white light. The hum of the machine became a deep, melodic tone. This was the ghost's broadcast. The truth uncounted. The effect was instantaneous and citywide. In the library above, the gala instantly stopped. The white light filtered up through the floor, engulfing the terrified Etherian elite. The melodic tone resonated deep within their chests. Across Manhattan, the temporal echoes ceased to be subtle flickers. They became massive, full-color, three-dimensional apparitions. In the financial district, the spectral image of the slave market from 1790 rose over Wall Street, visible to every panicked banker and broker. In the manufacturing district, the spectral images of dozens of overworked, impoverished children from the 1880s, their small hands frozen over looms, appeared over the factory floors. And most devastatingly, directly over the Etherian Society headquarters, a clear, shimmering image of Professor Alastair Finch standing before his original functional matrix appeared for a full, terrifying minute. He was silently pointing a spectral finger at the Society's front doors. The entire city saw the uncounted past, the truth of the foundations upon which the Gilded Age wealth was built. They saw the slave labor, the child exploitation, and the ghostly image of the forgotten inventor whose genius had been stolen. In the sub-basement, the white light faded. The steam died down. Vanderlyn lay on the floor, his eyes wide and vacant, his political and social power utterly shattered by the forced vision of the truth. He was a broken man, reduced to the uncounted. Elias and Eliza stood together by the now silent, inert chronodisruptor. They had not destroyed the Etherian society, but they had stripped away their most effective weapon, the illusion of legitimacy. They had successfully made the ghost of Manhattan a physical reality, witnessed by everyone. Epilogue: The permanent echo. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the Etherian society. The forced public witnessing of the temporal echoes, coupled with Elias's final devastating expose, which Vesper secured and rushed to a rival newspaper, destroyed the society's reputation. The public could no longer dismiss the malaise as sabotage. They had seen the true cost of their city's progress. Vanderlinde was arrested, charged not for murder, which was too difficult to prove, but for massive financial fraud and destabilization of public utilities, crimes the city was eager to prosecute after the collapse of their industrial engine. Elias Thorne was hailed as a hero. His story, The Ghost of Manhattan, became the single most famous, defining article of the Gilded Age, forever altering the public's perception of the city's history. He proved that the truth, no matter how absurd or uncounted, was always the most powerful force. The chronodisruptor remained dormant in the library basement, deemed too dangerous to move or destroy. The temporal echoes never fully disappeared. The disruptor's broadcast had left a permanent imprint. For decades to come, New Yorkers would report strange, fleeting moments of the past. A glimpse of a forgotten child, the scent of a long-gone tea shop, or the shadow of a colonial soldier. A constant, spectral reminder of the city's true foundations. Eliza used her newfound visibility and Finch's recovered notes to establish the city's first true historical archive, focusing not on the rich, but on the uncounted laborers and forgotten inventions that built New York. She became the ghost's guardian. Elias and Vesper, united by their extraordinary partnership, continued to dismantle the remnants of the society's financial network, ensuring that the gilded cage would never be perfectly sealed again. They had silenced the time machine, but they had woken the city's past, leaving the indelible, haunting, and necessary presence of the ghost of Manhattan to guard its future.
Gavel. The Day of Testimony. The courtroom in Missoula was packed, not just with lawyers and local press, but with nervous stockbrokers, state politicians, and representatives from every major bank in New York, all waiting for the testimony that would decide the fate of the Anaconda, and, by extension, the entire western U.S. copper market. Judge Jeremiah Finch presided, his demeanor stern and unyielding. The mood was electric, fueled by the knowledge that the man in the center of the controversy, a formerly enslaved man who had vanished for decades, was about to testify against the most powerful industrialist in the West. The defense, led by Daley's chief counsel, attempted to block Silas O'Connell's testimony, arguing that the preemption claim was abandoned and the claimant's identity was unverified. The claimant is a runaway slave, Your Honor, whose property rights were not recognized at the time of the alleged theft. His testimony is morally driven, but legally irrelevant, Daley's lawyer boomed. Judge Finch hammered his gavel. Mr. O'Connell is presenting evidence regarding a property boundary dispute concerning the 1874 S. Jones claim and the 1881 Anaconda patent. The court is interested only in the truth regarding the surveying fraud. Mr. O'Connell, please take the stand. Silas, dressed in a simple, dark suit provided by the Masonic Lodge, walked to the stand. Nell sat directly behind him, clutching the journal. Colonel Vance stood at the defense table, watching Silas like a hawk, ready to intervene if the testimony strayed toward political ruin. Under Nell's subtle guidance, Silas's testimony was masterful.
He spoke calmly, methodically, not of the moral horror of slavery, but of the precise science of geology. He described how Daly's original surveying of the Anaconda property, the one that formed the basis of the patent, perfectly matched the complex branching pattern he had tattooed on his back. He pointed to the legal documents, noting the specific angles and coordinates. "When I fled Kentucky in 1858, Silas explained, his voice ringing clearly across the court, "Marcus Daly did not steal a piece of paper, Your Honor. He memorized a scientific model, a model that showed the exact deep course of the copper vein network. His 1881 patent is based on this stolen information, and its boundary line encroaches exactly upon the land I had legitimately claimed years before, the S. Jones claim. Mr. Daly used my mind to locate the richest hill and then claimed the land for himself." Daly's lawyers were cornered. They could not refute the geological accuracy of Silas's claims, and they certainly couldn't produce Daly's original pre-1881 surveying data without revealing its fraudulent nature. The verdict and the compromise. After 3 days of intense technical testimony, Judge Finch delivered the verdict on the injunction. He confirmed that the court had found sufficient proof of fraud and prior encroachment. The court finds that the 1874 preemption claim of S. Jones, proven through testimony and documentation to be Mr. Silas O'Connell, is legally valid, and the subsequent 1881 Anaconda patent is hereby declared invalid on the grounds of encroachment and demonstrable prior knowledge used in the surveying process. A gasp swept through the courtroom. Daly's empire was legally shattered. However, Judge Finch immediately moved to the political reality. In light of the immediate economic necessity of the state of Montana, the court finds that the destruction of the Anaconda mine is not in the public interest. Therefore, the court will allow the Daly estate to maintain the property under a compromise decree. The terms of the decree were Nell's final triumph. Daly must pay a massive punitive fine and a substantial restitution sum directly to Silas O'Connell and the community of Freeman's Ridge. The S. Jones property must be formalized as a permanent federal land trust under the perpetual care of the Freeman's Ridge community. The Daly estate would retain the Anaconda mine, but would operate under strict new federal oversight for labor and environmental standards, a permanent political and legal leash provided by Clark's influence. Daly was financially wounded and legally humiliated. Clark had stabilized the state and secured his reputation as the necessary statesman. And Silas O'Connell, the runaway slave, had won a moral and legal victory, his rightful claim to the copper of the richest hill finally validated, though only symbolically. The injunction was lifted. The Anaconda resumed operation, but the Gilded Age was forever stained by the truth of its stolen foundation. Silas O'Connell, finally free and secure, walked out of the courthouse and vanished quietly back toward the Montana peaks, a free man.
The enduring legacy of the Anaconda lie. With the compromise decree signed, the immediate crisis in Montana ended, but the historical reverberations had only just begun. The great wealth of the Anaconda mine continued to flow, fueling America's electrification and the Spanish-American War effort. But the story of its origin, the Anaconda lie, was now an indelible stain on the nation's industrial conscience. The fates of the 3 protagonists were irrevocably sealed by the day in the Missoula courtroom. The king, Marcus Daly. Humiliation and decline. Marcus Daly survived the legal battle, but the victory was hollow. The punitive fines and the mandated federal oversight cut deeply into his profits and, more painfully, into his autocratic power. He was now forced to share influence with Clark and adhere to environmental and labor standards, a direct result of Nell Hawthorne's tenacity and Silas's testimony. Daly's humiliation was complete when the Montana state legislature, reeling from the scandal and swayed by Clark's timely economic interventions, formally voted to send William A. Clark to the U.S. Senate. Daly, the self-proclaimed king, had lost his final, most public feud. He spent the remainder of his life pouring his energy into non-mining ventures, particularly horse racing, seeking to regain the glorious reputation that copper had failed to sustain. He became obsessed with besting Clark in any arena possible, but the loss of his moral authority never left him. Daly died a wealthy man, but the public epitaph for him was permanently linked to the theft from Silas O'Connell. The anaconda was his monument, but the truth was its permanent shadow. The Senator, William A. Clark. Ambition realized and exposed. William A. Clark secured the political power he had always craved. His public stance as the savior of the Montana economy during the crisis cemented his election to the U.S. Senate, a position he attained in 1899. However, Clark's triumph was short-lived. His victory over Daly had been entirely based on a calculated moral crusade. Ironically, his own ruthless methods would soon catch up with him. The subsequent Senate investigation into the election, prompted by persistent accusations of bribery and corruption, unrelated to the Silas case but typical of Clark's methods, led to his forced resignation less than 2 years later. Clark's fate was that of a man who used morality as a weapon while possessing none himself. Though he resigned, he was wealthy enough to buy another Senate seat 2 years later and enjoyed a vast fortune. But the national press branded him the Montana Man, a symbol of the Gilded Age's most naked political avarice. The anaconda lie had helped him rise, but his own corruption ensured his national dishonor. The journalist, Nell Hawthorne, the unbreakable press. Nell Hawthorne never rebuilt the Butte Gazette. She received daily settlement money, but refused to use it to resurrect the paper under the shadow of the Copper Kings. Instead, she used the funds to establish a national muckraking publication in New York City, specifically dedicated to exposing corporate malfeasance. Nell realized that the power lay not in the local fight, but in the national spotlight. She used Silas's journal as the foundation for her first major exposé, published under the title The Red Heart of the Nation: How American Industry Was Forged on Stolen Wisdom. Her work launched her as one of the most respected and feared investigative journalists of the budding progressive era. She continued to champion labor rights, environmental sanity, and the dismantling of corporate trusts, forever leveraging the moral authority she gained by standing up to Daly. Nell's legacy was the demonstration that the press, even when literally burned to the ground, could be the most powerful check on industrial power. The Ghost, Silas O'Connell. Final freedom. Silas O'Connell achieved his true freedom and vindication. The S. Jones property, the small, legally recognized parcel of land near Blackfoot Creek, was formalized as a homestead for him and his descendants. It was a tangible, symbolic victory. The runaway slave owned the only piece of land the Copper King had publicly and legally conceded. Silas never returned to public life. He dedicated the rest of his years to the Freeman's Ridge community, working as an instrument maker and a respected elder. He taught the children not just reading and writing, but the same profound reverence for the earth that Master O'Connell had taught him, the science of the ground that had made him rich and almost killed him. He was the living proof that the intellectual contributions of marginalized individuals could not be erased, even by the most brutal forces of wealth and power. Silas's story became a quiet, powerful legend in the American West, a testament to the fact that though empires are built on gold and copper, the true roots of progress are often found in the stolen, unacknowledged wisdom of the people. The anaconda lie didn't just expose a theft, it exposed the complex moral compromises at the heart of the American dream during the Gilded Age, ensuring that for every glittering fortune, there was an untold, difficult truth buried beneath the surface.